There was ownership in the work we did. There was a greater sense of pride in the work of the auto builders.
If somebody'd ask you where you worked and you almost wanted to mumble, say, you know, I'm from the Chevrolet plant. But at Saturn Corporation, we all stood up very tall and proud and said, I work for Saturn.
We influenced a lot of people with the team concept.
I remember when Al Gore came to Spring Hill,
Oh,
he was,
yes.
as the vice president, and he was going to Saturnize the federal government.
Exactly.
And he came.
And I get emotional on it because I lived it, and I saw so much growth, and the people were so involved in what we did. We had so much involvement. UAW worked hand in hand with management on making this place work.
In the 1980s, General Motors and the United Auto Workers developed a new approach to labor management relations that was discussed and often copied around the world. The cars that GM built at its new Saturn Corporation plant in Spring Hill, Tennessee, ranked near the top for quality. Finally, an American automobile company seemed ready to take on the competition from Toyota and Honda. Saturn was touted as a whole new way of doing things. But then, after building cars in this new way for just 15 years, GM and the UAW abandoned the pioneering labor management partnership developed at Saturn. The Spring Hill plant stopped making Saturns in 2007 to switch to another GM product. Why? What happened to Saturn?
In the early 80s, General Motors was losing their shirt to the Japanese.
GM needed to build a small car at a profit. To figure out how, the company and the union set up a committee of 99 people, 60 from the union and 39 from management, in November 1982. They became known as the Committee of 99.
The goal for the 99 was to go out and find out what we could do differently to build a small car competitively in the United States, because we were losing our shirts. So that's what we did.
And so they came together, many of them not knowing each other, and met for the first time. And the thing we're looking for is who is doing the cutting edge in your particular area, both from a technology standpoint and from a people standpoint. They visited Volvo, they visited BMW, they went to Ford, they went to Lockheed. I think they visited 75 different companies in the US and abroad. They went to Michigan, they went to Harvard, they went to MIT. And through all of this, the overpowering thing was that there's a different way of working with people.
Let's keep our eye out on quality.
The Committee of 99 developed a team system to replace adversarial labor management with full cooperation. They advertised the new partnership with the slogan, "A different kind of company and a different kind of car." The Saturn partnership was based on 3 principles. The first was that basic decisions were made by self-directed teams. We filmed this meeting of the subs team in 1993.
Dan, you want to give us a report?
We came up with 5 proposals for our area, and basically all 3 teams come to a consensus that they kind of like proposal number 4 the best.
The second principle of the Saturn partnership was to try to make decisions by consensus, not by command or by a vote. That way everyone could buy into the resolution. The third principle was that every level of management would have a union counterpart. Pat Thomas and Terry Wonderland were high-level union and management coordinators in 1993.
We sit down and we talk about it. We don't sit out here on the floor and scream back and forth with each other. We come to the office. We may go in there and have a cup of coffee and say, hey, Terry, I've got a problem with something. Let's talk about it.
There was a genuine shared excitement about the mission of Saturn. Here were people who were involved in the most exciting development in the automobile industry since perhaps the 1960s. They knew that this was new. They knew it was exciting. They knew it was risky. They knew they were on the cutting edge of something.
They all wanted to be there and had chosen to take that path to build a new car and also develop a new relationship.
You might go as far as to say that down to the levels of turning the nuts and bolts on the car, that there was passion in people for their jobs. They were used for their physical capabilities, and they were used for their knowledge and their mental skills that they brought into the gang.
Saturn enjoyed in the 90s a level of quality performance, a level of brand loyalty that the rest of General Motors had not achieved. And so I think, and their ability to, in the mid-90s, generate more profit per vehicle than any other vehicle in General Motors, I think caused a lot of people to pay attention, and yet what they were paying attention to was a very, very different system.
Saturn opened at a difficult time in GM's history. For a generation, Detroit had concentrated on big, gas-guzzling, high-powered cars. In the 1960s, Volkswagen's Little Bug became popular. Honda sold its first cars in the U.S. in 1970. As sales of small foreign cars soared, General Motors' market share fell. In 1962, GM made half the cars sold in America. 45 years later, GM made only a quarter. The drop in GM's share cost auto workers thousands of jobs. The United Auto Workers responded by negotiating contracts that limited layoffs and provided extended unemployment benefits. This approach made GM even less competitive.
Trying to negotiate job security through a contract isn't doable, in my opinion. You can make the cost of getting out of business expensive for a particular corporation, but they'll pay it, and in the process they become less competitive.
3 obstacles to the partnership were evident from the day the Saturn plant opened. Consensus decision-making isn't quick. The partnership was expensive. And the partnership changed the traditional relationship of the union to its members.
Under the partnership, decisions took a long time. You had to have a lot of input. You go out to the teams. The involvement was such that people felt they had involvement in every decision that was made, and I don't think you can run a business that way and take a long time to make decisions.
Once the union got involved, there was some more discussion, and there was consensus decision making up front. However, what we found was that the implementation of that decision was much, much quicker. And I think that was really a huge benefit of the partnership relationship.
The main reason that the partnership was considered expensive was that having union counterparts to managers doubled the number of supervisory employees from 400 to 800.
I'm opposed to UAW members being co-managers as they are at Saturn in a partnership. We have co-managers for every position in the plant, from financial to even the person advertising the products. I want somebody that knows what the hell they're doing and how to sell them cars. I want somebody with an MBA from Harvard that knows how to move the product. I don't want somebody who's a political appointee that knows nothing about what the hell he's supposed to be doing.
The UAW was involved in all aspects of the business. We were actually partnered with General Motors. We had people going all over the world looking at equipment. We helped set up the lines. Our people were all trained. Well, as we break down into the globalization of the auto industry, that agreement was also, in all honesty, a very expensive agreement.
The 400 UAW partners in Spring Hill were not extra employees. These were employees that were taking jobs that in any other General Motors division would have been taken by non-represented managerial employees. They were at the level of supervisor and general foreman. They took jobs in engineering, in sourcing, in supplier selection, in personnel, in training.
High authority within General Motors, I believe, viewed it as though they were paying management side of the house their salaries, their incomes, to do their job, and they were additionally paying UAW employees to do what they felt like was the same job. We viewed it very, very differently. The number of management personnel that was on board at that time was considerably smaller than it is now.
The ratio was 50-1, 50 production employees to 1 module advisor. If in fact the union module advisor was not really managing, but Saturn had simply given the union that job to buy labor piece, then the managerial ratio would have been 100 to 1. And no other GM plant was operating at 100 to 1. They were operating at 25 to 1, which meant that in fact it was leaner at the middle level management in an operating sense.
We had both union and management leaders running the business out there on the floor. A lot of times the union stepped up, the union leaders would step up and run the business better than the management leaders. Now, in traditional unionism, that is not what is a norm. And so a lot of our members here had a really big problem with that.
I was working at a team in Saturn where it was common for employees to go and tell the boss on other employees, and they call that the consultation process at Saturn. It's a process they have where a fellow union employee can initiate a disciplinary action against a fellow union employee. And part of my strong union belief is that I feel that is wrong.
In the early 1990s, the partnership faced three challenges. GM did not assign Saturn a new model when it was due under standard industry practice. Saturn had to hire laid-off GM workers rather than workers who chose to join the experiment. And the leadership of GM and the union changed.
In 92, 93, there were indications that that General Motors was delaying the decision to bring a new product into Saturn, which was causing a lot of concern on the floor because the way to kill any car company is to delay the introduction of a new product because the competition is innovating, the competition is bringing out new products, and without a new product, Saturn was going to lose market share and began to lose market share.
I think it's fair to say that the product was outdated. They needed a new product long before they finally got one.
We were building a small, high-mileage vehicle, and gasoline at the time was about 87 cents a gallon. It was cheaper than water, and people didn't want a small car.
The fact that General Motors was losing at that time over $1 billion a year made it impossible for them to make a decision on whether or not to bring a new model into the plant.
The fact is there's only so much money, and you got to realize that in this country we're not at 50% of the market or 40% of the market anymore. And we are not. Our market share is not where it was at the time that Spring Hill was developed, for instance.
A lot of the managers coming up through the organization were trying to get money for their plant, and they couldn't because they put money down here at Saturn. And I think that gave us the impression throughout the organization that maybe we're prima donnas down here, that we're getting all the money and they're not getting any. One fellow I know mentioned that he couldn't even buy a chair for his office because they're giving all the money to Saturn.
Saturn workers were shocked when they learned that the new Saturn model would be built in Wilmington, Delaware, instead of in Spring Hill.
They were going to close Wilmington and had said they were going to close Wilmington. In the 1993 negotiations, then Vice President Steve Yokich had got concurrence from the company that they would put a product in Wilmington.
They had no other product to go into Wilmington. So the leadership under Steve Yokich, the president of the UAW at the time, said to me personally, why would we give another vehicle to Spring Hill when I've got members who are going to be laid off in other plants?
Hard times at GM meant many plants were closing. The company and the union agreed to allow laid-off workers to go to Saturn.
That was the point about 1993 when you began to see a change, because the people who came to Saturn in the first phase were all volunteers. They were excited about the team concept. They were excited about the new ways of working in partnership. The people who came in the second wave needed a job.
We couldn't hand select people anymore. You know, we had to take folks that came in from plants that were shutting down. Some of the folks didn't want to work there.
And so a lot of those people maybe didn't want to try some of these new concepts, going into the training type programs that we were doing, even into the team concept itself. A lot of people just didn't feel the inside from your heart, type thing about the team concept.
The third change affecting Saturn was a change in leadership.
The original champions for Saturn, both on the union side, Don Eflin, and on the management side, Al Warren in particular, and Roger Smith, the CEO, all had gone and retired since then.
Don Eflin had retired from the UAW, and Steve Jokic became vice president over the GM section of our union. And he was not philosophically aligned with any of these partnership, joint management ideas whatsoever.
So you didn't have a lot of deep support, I think, both within the UAW in Solidarity House or among General Motors in Detroit for Saturn.
It was shortly after 1993 when Mr. Jokic visited Spring Hill and told me to my face that he was not going to allow this to expand beyond Spring Hill, and in fact he was going to do everything he could do to make sure the capital investment for product and process in Spring Hill was going to be cut off, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, you can't do anything unless you got money in terms of the manufacturing game, and we were being strangled by a corporation that didn't know how to handle us, and at the same time by a organization, the International UAW, and at that time didn't know how to handle us. We were the outlaws, if you will.
You have to also understand at the same time there was a growing rivalry between Mike Bennett, the chairman of the MAC Advisory Committee, the chief local union leader at Spring Hill, with Steve Jokic, the international union leader, president of the UAW. The two of them were constantly debating and having differences of opinion on a variety of different issues.
I don't think it was a change in leadership that impacted it. The world changed. The automotive industry changed.
Many at Spring Hill believed that Saturn's problem was being too successful. So successful that it threatened the leaderships of GM and the UAW.
Skip LaFoe, the president of Saturn, told me our problem was you never want to be more holier than the Pope. And the fact of the matter is that we were so successful that we were actually an embarrassment to people back in Detroit on the union side and the management side.
Something had to change, and either General Motors had to begin to look more like Saturn in order to be able to achieve that kind of performance, or Saturn had to go back and look more like General Motors. I think it was unstable to have this innovative organization look so different than the parent company.
The partnership came to a vote in 1998. A group of dissidents in Saturn organized a referendum on whether to abandon the partnership and go under the national agreement that covered other GM auto plants.
There was many workers who stood up in support of labor and unions and the right of workers to organize, and that we are different than management, and we have no business working together with management, and the two sides are separate and should always remain separate.
Saturn Corporation and the UAW spent heavily to support the partnership.
The UAW was taking out ads on television. They had ads on billboards in the newspaper. They had the in-plant television round the clock playing. The national media picked up on the happy Saturn workers were now unhappy, and they were trying to dump their agreement, and it built into a national news story.
In 2 days of polling, the members voted 4,052 to 2,120 to retain the partnership.
And I found it kind of incredible that after all the scare tactics and that the company had, still one out of three workers was ready to dump the Saturn agreement at any cost. They didn't care. They wanted to get rid of it.
The UAW, by long tradition, has rival caucuses that put up slates for local union officers. In the 1990s, Mike Bennett's Vision Caucus had dominated Local 1853. But in the local elections of 1999, Bennett and his caucus were defeated.
And it was overwhelming victory. Every single person of the pro-management, pro-partnership, pro-cooperation vision team was defeated by overwhelming majorities. Overwhelming majorities. Every single one of them was gone. And when I was given the phone call with the results, I said, well, what about this person? What about Mike Bennett? And he says, don't you understand? Every one of them's gone. I said, well, what about this person? You don't get it. Every single one is gone. They've all been defeated. Every single one.
So there were a variety of different reasons why the Vision team lost that election, and its successors, which were, I think, the members of a Democratic Union, Jeep Williams and Ron Hankins, took over the leadership of both the presidency and the partnership. But none of them ran against the partnership, and I think that's really important to remember. And that is in '93 and '96 and in '99, none of the other caucuses ran on a platform wanting to dismantle the partnership. They all wanted to run the partnership, and they had different views about how to run the partnership, but none of them ran against the partnership.
Patronage was an issue in the 1999 campaign.
There was also some criticism in the 90s that that in order to be appointed, that members had to be active members of the Vision Team caucus. And so there was a concern that these people were not simply being selected strictly on skills and ability, but also based on some politics. And that fed its way into the election in 1999 when the Vision Team and Mike Bennett were defeated.
That did not change after the election, according to one of Mike Bennett's friends.
Put in for various job applications, of move on to a specific area where you had knowledge, skills, and abilities, and come to find out that if you weren't politically correct within the union and so on, you pretty much stayed stationary where you were. And it's been that way since.
We could have made it work at Saturn if them UAW appointees would have been elected. If we could have elected them and had them accountable to the workers so they do their job, and if they don't do their job, we'll vote them out. It could have worked. Democracy could have made that place work.
What happened for the next 3 years was that the union was unwilling to step up to many of the hard decisions. There was a lot of frustration on the part of management that the union was not holding up its side of the partnership and adhering to the ways in which they had agreed to operate.
As we started taking less responsibility for our own decision-making process and having decisions made for us, we saw the ownership and the passion for our car starting to disappear. When I decided that I wasn't going to make that decision, I would have my supervisor, or WOOC as we called him at the time, my WOOC or my AMA or my OMA, we keep shoving the decision level up, and we finally shoved it all the way up to General Motors, who said, you guys aren't going to act like that anymore. We're taking over.
They felt it was just easier to make a decision at the upper level and say, we're going to do it because I said we are. That coming from the management side. And then the union side saying, well, if we're no longer going to be included in these decisions, then maybe this partnership is dead.
Ultimately, what happened was that General Motors forced Saturn under the national agreement in 2005. They offered them signing bonuses, they offered them new product and investment in order to accept the national agreement, come under the national agreement, and give up their local agreement.
And Mike said, we got to do this, guys, not only for ourselves, but for our membership out there. We got 2,400 people depending on us for their livelihoods. Okay, so we take a vote, we'll go under the national agreement.
And it was, say no and die a slow death, or say yes to moving under the national agreement and work towards getting some future product here.
I think they use us from the neck down now rather than the head down. I was hired here that they were going to use me for my knowledge, skills, and ability. Today, they look at us and say, well, we're going to run the business, we're going to do it this way, and if you don't like it, call your committee man.
With that came the time clocks. We didn't have time clocks, if you remember. We was on honesty, but now we've got the time clocks.
We were hired as thinkers to bring innovative ideas before, and now we really don't have that anymore.
You come in, you punch the clock, you get on the line, you do your job, you punch out, and you go home.
And for some of us, it's rather mundane and boring now for us. We came to Saturn to get away from that kind of rat in a wheel thing, or putting the widget on the widget.
And it's frustrating for the people on the floor because we know that some things are wrong. I mean, I'm not saying we're doing everything right. I think that we are educated enough, we've been taught enough that we can help if they would just let us.
Some people are happy just to come in and do their job and go home. But there are some that would like to see what we did back in 2004 continue. And it's too bad because it was a good concept.
I just know that there's a better way of doing business, and we've lived that at Saturn. We're not doing it today because they've decided to go back to tradition. However, there's a lot of things that they do that we've started at Saturn that they still do.
We have about 176 manufacturing operations around the globe, and at last count that I'm aware of, and you will find the team concept alive in those facilities.
At Spring Hill also, cooperation continues between the local union and management.
The contract has changed, but I have a lot of the same level of involvement that I did when we had the co-management model here.
There is a resilience to this partnership. This partnership has lasted since the early 90s, has gone through a change in many changes in management, many changes in union leaders, changes in contract, and yet what we were told repeatedly was that the teams are extremely effective still.
This is an American success story as well as an American tragedy. If you really look what occurred here in the first, I think, 10 years of this organizational development, it was a tremendous amount of success. And the tragedy part of it is that, and the lesson of this is that any organization that's trying to develop itself and make changes requires the support of the highest leadership within the corporation. If you don't have that confidence and that support, you're not going to be successful.
So I'm afraid that General Motors learned the wrong lessons from Saturn. They learned that, yes, it's an expensive investment, but it's an investment that could have been recouped and made successful for the organization if General Motors was willing to take the next step and say, this is the way we are going to manage for the future.
In my view, General Motors had a real learning disability to be able to take the lessons that were learned in Spring Hill and apply them in some effective manner. Had they done that in the mid-90s, they wouldn't be in the difficulty they are today.
I think the UAW lost an opportunity to evolve as a union to a much more team concept, much more shared decision-making, much more of a learning organization that would have helped the industry to become more productive, helped the domestic producers to become more competitive relative to Toyota and Honda and some of their other international competitors. And that's, I think, a tragic part of the history of the 1990s in the UAW.
So why did GM and the UAW end the partnership? Perhaps it was the loss of its corporate and union patrons and the rise of unsympathetic leaders like the UAW's Steve Yokich, who died in 2002. GM was already losing billions of dollars, and the UAW was having thousands of members laid off. Maybe the success of Saturn came too late. Or perhaps GM and the UAW simply lacked the vision to follow Saturn's example. In the end, the importance of Saturn may be its influence on other companies, on labor management cooperation around the world.
And then when the word got out all over the world about this new Saturn, this new concept called Saturn, this new manufacturing facility called Saturn, the world wanted to come see us. We did not fail because we could go in some of these different organizations that came to visit us, and I can see some of the same things that we talked about. Saturn itself didn't fail.